Hey guys, it's Jedi Like, so welcome to the 27th episode of Beyond Tatooine, where I bring on different collectors to talk about how their love of Star Wars originated, as well as take a look at and chat about their collections. And on today's episode, I have Chelsea from the Space Wizards Book Club. So how are you doing today?
Good. Doing great. Happy to be here. Excited to be here.
It's exciting to have you on. I follow your stuff. You're very knowledgeable when it comes to lore and all the books and stuff, so it's always interesting to see your posts and what your thoughts are on certain things. So it's exciting to have you here. So could you tell us a little bit about your channel, where people can find you and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'm a little all over the place, or at least I try to kind of, hit all corners of the internet. I am, of course, on Substack, which is like kind of the main hub for the Space Wizards Book Club, weekly newsletter, blog style. I can just do whatever I want on there. It's really fun because
Yeah.
I'm a writer at heart. I like my
Okay.
main skill is writing. But I also have the Space Wizards Book Club on Instagram, which is where I share pretty Star Wars book photos and reviews. And then I am on TikTok as well. I'm not Space Wizards Book Club over there. I'm like Chelsea Reads on there. And then there is a Space Wizards Book Club Etsy shop, which is kind of my little passion project of bookmarks and stickers that I love.
Yeah, which is really cool. I was taking a look at it beforehand, and you've got some pretty cool stuff on there.
Thanks. I
Uh,
try. It's my
yeah,
little
you
like
got
creative
stickers,
endeavor.
and I really liked this one, which kind of does like the phases of the High Republic, because I feel like that was super daunting when I was kind of
Mhm.
trying to look at it. I was like, man, I should read the High Republic stuff before the Acolyte, but I was like, there are so many books, but I really like that like I kind of lays it out really nicely. So
Yeah, like that was I feel like how should people read the High Republic, or like where do I start with the High Republic is like one of the most common questions I get on any like sort of like social channel, like when I'm posting about the High Republic and things like that. They're like, where do I start, and it's easy to like tell people where to start, but I can understand how like daunting it can be. The High Republic has been publishing for over 3 years now, and there's a lot of books, a lot of comics too. So that's like my effort to be like, hey, while you're reading, you can have everything on your bookmark and kind of go down the list of like, okay, I can read
yeah.
this book next and read this book next.
So do the comics kind of like go with the books a little bit, or are they kind of their own thing?
Yes, they do go with the books. I am not as knowledgeable of like where the comics fit in regards to like each book. I have maybe found I need to look for it. Like I think somebody out there has made some sort of like guide of like where they all fit. But it's like down to like the issue too. I'm like always really impressed by that because I'm like, how do you know like that happens like 2 weeks before this over here? Like that's a lot. But yes, they kind of do go with the books as well. They're usually like focusing on a group of characters over here, and the books are focusing on this group of characters.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you got some pretty. And I was just thinking to myself the other day, because I'm trying to get more into reading. I was like, I gotta get myself like a cool Star Wars bookmark, because I'm using like a post-it note right now.
Oh,
And this is perfect. So I feel like I need to order one because these are really
go for
cool.
it. Would love that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love seeing people post like photos of like the bookmarks that they bought like with like while they're reading their Star Wars book like out in the world. I'm like, oh, look at like my little creative babies over here. Like
Yeah.
it's always really
Absolutely.
cool to see.
And they look like they're really good quality. They have great designs on them. So very,
Thanks.
very impressed. It
Thank
looks
you.
amazing. So I guess I'll start with my first question. How did you become a Star Wars fan? What was your introduction to the
Oh,
fandom? What really drawed you, like, brought you in and was like, yep, I'm a Star Wars fan now?
well, I feel like I've been at least somewhat of a Star Wars fan since I was little. My, dad was a Star Wars fan, so he introduced me to Star Wars. He took me to see the prequel movies when they came out, starting with The Phantom Menace. And, I've kind of more casually liked Star Wars throughout my life. And I feel like when I moved out on my own, was in college, I kind of dove a little bit more into Star Wars, I want to go back and like actually like watch the movies and kind of get more into it. Started casually like picking up a Star Wars book here and there, like Heir to the Empire. And I really think that it started kind of on the incline of like my obsession with Star Wars when right before like The Force Awakens came out. So like obviously it was really exciting that a new Star Wars movie was going to come out. I was working at my local newspaper at the time, and it was like obviously an event. Like a new Star Wars movie, especially like the first movie in like a new trilogy, is an event. So I and like a group of like other nerds on staff. Like I worked in the features department, so we were all nerds for something. So we like went like full like speed, like covering all kinds of like doing like little Star Wars stories and things like that. And went to see The Force Awakens like opening night and did like it was like Force Friday where they like dropped all the merch and things like that. And that's when I like really started getting more into it. And then like I was a Star Wars fan. Like I went to see The Force Awakens. I saw it like 3 times opening weekend because I like went with various people.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously went to see The Last Jedi opening weekend and The Rise of Skywalker as well. And then it wasn't until The High Republic was about to come out, I had just left my kind of my full-time like daily news job to pursue freelancing and teaching, that I really like dove headfirst into like Star Wars books. I, read Light of the Jedi and reviewed it and like covered it when it was about to come out. And that I was like, this is it. This is going to be my personality now, is Star Wars books and like covering new Star Wars stuff, because by that time it was like really ramping up with new Star Wars books and projects and everything. So that's kind of like my journey to like all of this now.
Yeah, nope, I feel the exact same. I've always been a Star Wars fan. My dad introduced me to it when I was very young. But I feel like when Mando kind of came out around like that COVID era time, I like really kind of just went full force with it, and it has become my personality now. So I'm definitely a big Star Wars nerd, but I've always wanted to read books, but I just feel like I'm always reading a textbook. But I've like really started to find good books. Like I'm reading Plagueis right now. And I think that is
Oh,
like such a really good book. So I was kind of excited to see him when he popped up in the Acolyte finale, but definitely a big fan of Plagueis. So I feel like I gotta kind of just find the good Star Wars books or something I enjoy reading. So I think that'll make me more of a reader now, but we'll see.
yeah. I mean, I agree with you too. I mean, I was in college, I was like not reading beyond what was assigned to me. And even when I did like my master's program, I was reading like really thick like textbooks, and I'm like, I don't want to, like I don't want to read anything else. I was reading so much. But by the end of 2020, I was done with my master's program, going into 2021. And of course it's like, still pandemic time, like peak pandemic time. We're all stuck at home. And, really like places like Instagram and TikTok really blew up when it comes to fandom and books and things like that. So I like really got into like those communities. And it was at the same time like we have The Mandalorian coming out, and it feels like we've been in like this Star Wars renaissance ever since then, with books and TV shows and all these other projects. And it's so interesting to think about that we haven't had a new Star Wars movie in when did The Rise of Skywalker come out? Like it's been a minute, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's been a few years.
5, 6,
2018, 19, I think.
yeah, I can't.
Around then.
Yeah, something around then. So like maybe 5 years. And like, but this is like it feels like this is like the most Star Wars we've gotten in so long, and there's been no movies. We've just had like incredible TV show after TV show and book and comics and celebrations, and yeah, and it's just so fun.
Yeah, I feel like that's a perfect way to put it. It does feel like the Star Wars renaissance because there's been, lulls of, periods where there is no Star Wars. We got the OTs and then there was nothing, then we got the prequels, then there was nothing, and now we're just full-fledged, and I've really enjoyed a lot of the stuff, and it's been cool to kind of experience different avenues within Star Wars. But
Yes.
speaking of shows, do you have a favorite show currently?
Oh, that's like it's so hard to like pick a favorite anything because then I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, but I really like that over there. I was even like thinking about what was my favorite Star Wars movie, and I'm like, I can't pick. Like, I really can't
I
pick.
gotcha.
Yeah, I can maybe pick like a trilogy,
Okay.
but show wise, like it's really hard. I feel like Ahsoka and Obi-Wan Kenobi like really like hit that like prequel kid, the feels that the characters and the character work and the stories that like grew from the prequel movies and the Clone Wars TV show and then Rebels and things like that, and like all of that came together like differently in those obviously differently in those two shows, and it
Mhm.
was like very much like, I mean, fan service in like the best way. I was like, this is for us. This is for people like me. This is for those people who just absolutely loved this era, the prequels and the Clone Wars and Rebels, and I just loved all of it. But I can't. I mean, I also can't say enough good things about Andor. It just felt so different, and I think that's what really trips me up with like trying to pick a favorite show.
Yeah.
Same thing with like the books because they all are so great on their own and for what they are. Like Andor is so different from a show like Obi-Wan Kenobi. And even like thinking about The Acolyte, which just ended, and now I can like say, like, we have the first season, and I'm like, I loved so many things that happened during The Acolyte and kind of the vibes and where we were going with the storytelling. And that is obviously so different than Andor, than Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I really find something to love in all of the shows.
No, yeah, I mean, that's totally valid. I get it. It's hard to pick, especially when we're getting so much good, it feels like, but I'm glad that you did kind of enjoy The Acolyte. I feel like there's few and far between people who liked
Mm-hmm.
it, but I feel like a lot of the High Republic people that, like, are really reading the books and stuff, it was always interesting to hear their take on it, especially since we got Vernestra. 'Cause I
Mm-hmm.
don't know too much about her, but I know one of my buddies, Jimmy, he was like, "I don't know, like, she's so much different in the books than the show," and I was like, "That's always interesting to hear." What were your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on, like, kind of, getting the High Republic on screen, getting to see Vernestra, things of that nature?
I mean, it was definitely really exciting. Just seeing the High Republic Jedi robes and just like seeing that era, like even glimpses of things that are in the books on the screen. It was so exciting. And I do agree that at this time, Vernestra is very different than when she was in the books. But I always have to stop myself and be like, in the books, she's 17. In the Acolyte, she's like 117, right? So I'm like, okay, like she has seen some, even in the books, by the at 17, in like the 2 years that we've been like following her, she has been through some horrible stuff and lots of trauma, heartbreak, and things like that. And so I can only imagine all the other stuff that she has experienced by the time we see her in The Acolyte. So I'm like, okay, like there's obviously a reason why she acts like this and why she makes these decisions that she does, even when I don't agree with them. Like, I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that she has done and like some of the things that it seems like she has done. So I'm really curious to kind of see where they take her character and obviously everybody else too, and kind of where they take the show next, hopefully in a season two.
Yeah, I did really enjoy the show. I thought it was really good. I mean, yes, it had its things that I could do without, but I think overall it was like a pretty strong show. There was a lot of things that I liked. I liked seeing the High Republic. We got to see lightsabers again, but I do hope we get a season 2, and I think it's going to be very Renestra and Chimere focused, like kind of how their relationship started, and like having him as a Padawan, and then him breaking away and then joining Plagueis possibly as his apprentice. So I don't know. Do they mention Chimere? Like, is he a character that's in the High Republic novels? I was trying to research that like yesterday, but couldn't really find.
No, no, the only like recognizable characters that are in the High Republic or that like we've seen before that are in the Acolyte are obviously Vernestra and well, we've already kind of talked spoiler stuff anyway, but the appearance of Yoda at the end, like the back of his head. Obviously we know who that is. And obviously Yoda is in the High Republic, just not as a main character. But no, there's it what and I didn't expect it to be a like High Republic character cameo fest in the High Republic. So that's fine with me. But no, Chimere is not in the High Republic. And I wrote this in my newsletter that's going out to, Friday, so tomorrow. But like what's next for the High Republic and kind of like how and the Acolyte as well, like how we're going to either or hopefully like connect these two stories, because you have the High Republic ending, like done publishing books in the spring of next year, maybe late spring, early summer of next year. And then the Acolyte is 100 years later. So like you have like a century of storytelling that like we don't have yet. And I'm obviously would love to have more of like that kind of like bridging the gap there. But there's definitely potential to tell even more stories of like what happens after like this phase of the High Republic and how we got to the Acolyte, like what Vernestra has been doing and like what the Jedi have been doing and kind of the aftermath of like what happens in the books and maybe how that connects to what's going on in the Acolyte.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the High Republic's been very like fulfilling, so I don't know why they would not kind of pursue investigating or writing about that era, because I think it would be very interesting, especially for people like me. I would love to kind of read more about it, to learn more about her character and kind of what transpired, because I feel like trying to go back and reading all the High Republic novels is a little daunting, but I am interested in doing that at some point, but I guess we'll just have to see.
Yes.
And you've mentioned the prequels a few times. Would that be your favorite trilogy, perhaps?
Yeah, it is. I think it's because that's my like Star Wars trilogy that like was coming out when I was young. I feel like, a lot of people who the original trilogy is their favorites because they were at that age and like those movies like came out when they were younger. And like that's what they grew up on, was like this was the original trilogy. And so like I feel like, as a early mid 30s millennial, like the prequels are it for me. And I am really interested to see like people who as they grew up with the sequel movies and like how those are gonna like be their Star Wars movies, their favorite Star Wars ones. But yes, prequels, like I can watch them over and over again. And even in Revenge of the Sith, like I know how it ends. I've seen it so many times. I still like hold out hope. I'm like, oh, he's gonna make the right decision. He doesn't ever, but
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's interesting too when I interview certain people and get to talk with them about their favorite movies and stuff. And it usually seems that like some of the first movies you were introduced to and really have that core memory of going and watching it in theaters is usually the one that I feel like people resonate most with. But I'm definitely a prequels baby. But I always find it interesting because, to the older generations, the OTs, Luke was there, like that was it. For us, it was Anakin. And now for this newer generation, it's Rey. So it's always interesting to kind of see and kind of, hear the younger people's thoughts on what, because I'm not so big on the sequels, but I know that that is their prequels to me. So I always find
Mhm.
that that's, like, interesting to get their takes on it and to hear, like, "Oh my gosh, like, Rey, she's a female Jedi," especially, like, younger girls are like, "I look up to her, like, she's so amazing," and I'm like it makes it hard to dislike the sequels because it's so important to them, you know? But
And honestly, that's what I love so much about Star Wars and like, you know, most of the fandom is that even if someone doesn't like, you know, your favorite movie or your favorite book or your favorite character or whatever, like a lot of people I find that I interact with in this fandom, uh, they can at least like understand like why that movie or book or character, you know, resonates with that person as opposed to like, okay, well, I didn't really like it that much, but like I can understand like why somebody else liked it that much.
100%, and I think that's important, and kind of I feel like with the Accolade, it's been tough because I feel like, even though you enjoyed it, people are always like leaving the comments and this and that. And I'm like, you don't have to like it, and that's totally fine, but you don't have to put others down for what they do like, and vice versa. So
Mhm.
it is interesting to kind of see. But I mean, that's why we're in the fandom. We love Star Wars. It doesn't have to be for the same reason. Star Wars is such an expansive universe that you can love certain parts of it. You don't have to love all of it. You can if you want, but everyone likes it for a different reason and resonates with different characters, different shows, different movies, and that's what I love about it. And that's why I love talking to other people and getting their opinions on it and really kind of understanding their story and why they love Star Wars. So it's always fun.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I know you said it might be hard to pick a favorite character, but do you have certain characters that you do resonate with?
Um, I do love a lot of the women characters, female
Okay.
characters. I loved Padme as a little girl. You know, I was
Mhm.
obsessed. Had a Padme doll. Loved all the outfits. So, and I feel like I have like favorite characters of like in different eras of like the timeline that
Yeah.
and even like eras of my life. I've always really loved Obi-Wan as well. Just his and like the more I read about the characters and like the more like books that they're in, I end up loving them more because I'm getting like a little more perspective and that's what's so special about books, particularly Star Wars books, is that you get characters like their own perspectives in the books, like you kind of get their like inner monologues and things like that, so
Mhm.
like you start to like know them more. And all of the books that like star Obi-Wan, who's like he's either like the main character or a main character in the book, are just so excellent at fleshing out his character and just like how he operates and his motivations and things like that. And he's not exactly like his master. He's not exactly like Qui-Gon, but his intentions are like so pure. And he really is like a genuinely good person. And I feel like he embodies so much of like what is good about the Jedi and like what's also kind of not great. Um, Kind of like going back to like conversations about the acolyte that people are having is like how the show showcases like the Jedi's, you know, righteous intentions, and like they had these great intentions and they were, you know, they thought they were doing the right thing, but inevitably like there's terrible consequences. And I feel like Obi-Wan really embodies that, and it's so relatable where you can look at this character, and there's other characters in Star Wars that do this as well, but I feel like Obi-Wan sticks out in my mind is that he so desperately like wanted to do the right thing, like the right thing and what he thought was the right thing. um and wanted to help people, wanted to help Anakin. Like he had so much love for Anakin, and he inevitably like, you know, was one of the people that just, not that he failed him, but like even though he tried so hard, it just wasn't enough. And I feel like in the show Obi-Wan Kenobi, like you see him as this like tortured soul. Like he is so just like he's broken and like living with all of the things that we've seen in the Clone Wars TV show and the prequels and in the books. Like that's why like that show like hit so hard for me, is because by the time that show aired, I had obviously watched the Clone Wars. I had obviously watched the prequel movies many, many times, and I've read like a ton of like all the prequel kind of era books that we've gotten so far. And just like seeing Obi-Wan like that, like my heart like broke for him, because he truly did like love Anakin. He loved the Jedi and the Force and everything so much, and he's just like this broken man, and it was so sad.
Yeah, it definitely was, and then especially to, like, finally see Anakin, like, in the Vader suit, like, that whole scene I felt like made the show for me. Getting the flashbacks and stuff, of course, to the prequel era was, like, phenomenal, but that
Mm-hmm.
whole, like, just really that whole episode, like, the conversation back and forth, having to fight each other all over again, like, it was
Yeah.
definitely very emotional, and I feel like a lot of people kinda sleep on Obi-Wan, but I thought that that was, like, just a really good show. Like, I really enjoyed it. It's a lot darker. You do get to see Vader's just raw, like, strength and hatred and stuff, but you get to see that interaction between the two of them again,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was really, like, the highlight of the show for me, at least.
Yeah, I felt like Obi-Wan Kenobi as a show was so focused on like character and emotions and like really digging into those that we, you know, kind of left off with in Revenge of the Sith, where we are watching these characters have the worst day of their lives. um and like not have any sort of like closure from that, not like, you know, things don't get better for either one of them. Like yeah, like Darth Vader's kind of in charge, I guess. He's in a position of power, but like he is not a happy person. Like he after uh, obviously like he just wasn't a happy person at all, like ever again, until like, you know, his son kind of brings him back and like saves him in a way. But just seeing how consumed by like loss and heartbreak, and at least, you know, for Vader it's like anger and hatred, and then Obi-Wan is just like almost like despair and trauma and loss and things like that. And it was just like such like excellent character work, and I felt like it just made the prequel movies, especially Revenge of the Sith, and then the original trilogy, hit so much harder after we saw all of that. Especially like thinking, I'm like, I don't, did I do it? I don't think I did, but like I wanted to rewatch A New Hope after seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then like I feel like seeing that final duel between Vader and Obi-Wan like is gonna like be so much more emotional. And then even seeing, you know, watching Return of the Jedi, and kind of like after I've like read some books and things like that, and just like the moment when like Anakin returns to the
Mm.
light, like, you know, is so much more emotional because of shows like that and the books and things like that. And like that's really like what I love about all of this Star Wars stuff, is just how all this, you know, supplemental material, I feel like supplemental is like not even like that great of a word for it, but all this like extra stories like add so much depth to the core movies that we have.
Yeah, 100%. So, are there certain books I feel like they might touch on, like, pretty much the characters that we've already seen, perhaps? I'm sure there's other characters out there in the expanded universe, but is there any story that you've read, or maybe multiple stories that you've read, that you would love to see kind of make its way to live action?
Hmm.
Like,
I
movie or
mean,
show? Either or.
it's I want to say Dark Disciple. And I am cautiously optimistic that we will get some sort of explainer flashback with Asajj Ventress, because that book what like blew me out of the water. Like that book is incredible, and I was so excited to see her return in the Bad Batch, even though we thought that she was dead. And I I felt like also cautiously optimistic that they weren't just going to like ignore Dark Disciple, like that happened. And thinking back on, I've read the book twice, but thinking back on how it actually ended, I'm like, technically they did leave it a little open to have her return, just kind of based on where she was kind of, had her like little funeral thing.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, I guess I can see that. They don't have to do a bunch of heavy lifting to like justify bringing her back. Like it does make sense. I would love to see that in animation, live action. It would probably be animation, since like she reappeared in animation. But honestly, like I would love to see her just in live action anyway. Like there's so much more of her story to tell now that she's back. So I'm like, okay, so like what is she doing like after Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars? Like what is she up to? Um and in Obi-Wan, the show, I don't remember what episode it was, but he sees on like the wall of this safe house words and names. Obviously, at one point you can see that it says "For Light and Life," which is from the High Republic, and I'm like, love that. But you also see him read and say out loud, like, "Oh, Quinlan was here," and I'm like, yes. So my right now, my headcanon is Asajj Ventress met back up with Quinlan Voss, and they are like the leaders of like the path. Is it the path? Hidden Path? Is that
Yeah,
what it's
the
called?
path. I think that's what
Yeah.
they're referring to it as, is the
Okay.
path.
And like going around and trying to rescue and like force sensitive children and people and like get them to safety. And I'm like, and then they live happily ever after, forever and ever. They never die. So that's just my headcanon right now until I'm proven otherwise.
Yeah, so I was trying to read the Dark Disciple book like prior to Bad Batch, but I didn't finish it until like way after. Is Dark Disciples prior to or after the Bad Batch series like technically takes place? Do you
It
know?
happens. It's before.
Okay.
So I'm looking. I'm like, I guess I could like look on my shelf. It's Dark Disciple happens before Revenge of the Sith. Like
Okay.
kind of like I don't know like timeline wise, like year wise, but
Hmm.
it's like right before,
Gotcha.
because Dark Disciple is all about like this Jedi Hail Mary last ditch effort to like end the war, um and trying to, assassinate Count Dooku and things like that.
Yes.
So it's like right before Revenge of the Sith. And then, you know, all that happens in the book. And then when the Bad Batch picks up, it's right at like Order 66. So,
Gotcha. Okay, that does make sense because I know they mentioned like Grievous and stuff in there, but for some reason, I guess while I was reading it, I had the impression it was after Bad Batch, maybe because that's just like
mm.
when I was finishing reading it. But it does make sense because they fight Grievous and stuff, and Grievous is clearly done by Revenge of the Sith. So that's interesting that she does make that kind of reprise in Bad Batch, even though we kind of, have her send off and the funeral and stuff at the end of the book. So that is interesting. But there has been some rumblings that, possibly the next animated show will be with Asajj. And of course, we did have the mention of Quinlan and Obi. So I feel like that would be like a pretty big deal, especially for people that read Dark Disciples. That would be really cool. But they also kind of had this mention. I don't know if it's connected or not, but in Tales of the Empire at the end, Barriss was like, with the force sensitive kid, she was like, she'll know what to do with them. Like, just bring them
Mm-hmm.
there. And I was like, are they setting up for the path? Like, is this going to happen? Because they also kind of showed a little bit of it in visions. Like, there was that one episode where the lady takes her like underground, and I was like, I don't know. Like, I feel like all these little things are leading to that. So I'd be
Mhm.
very excited to see that.
I would be too. I think it would be great to have a another honestly, like the animated Star Wars shows are like so good, and they get really dark, especially like Tales of the Empire was, I was like, oh, this is, and Tales of Jedi and Tales of the Empire was like, oh, this is actually not for kids. Like this is dark and it's violent and it's sad. And but I mean, like such incredible storytelling within like this kind of short episode format. But yeah, like I feel like there has been like little sprinklings of hints that of what we're gonna see next. And that, you know, all signs are kind of pointing to another show that is animated and that is possibly about like the path and things like that. And I would love to see that. I definitely think Asajj earned, you know, like deserves her own show. I would love to see like her and Quinlan like back together. And honestly, like I would love to just see Dark Disciple in any sort of like flashback, because it was originally a story arc for the Clone Wars that just got turned into a
Oh,
book. So it was going to be episodes of the Clone Wars. So I'm like, okay, like we can still do that. We can just do flashback episodes. I would love to see that.
yeah, that I didn't know that. Wow, you learned so much from reading these books. That's why I want to like get more into it. But yeah, I would really love to see like kind of the path and stuff explored, even if it has to be through animation, because honestly, the animation I feel like has become so good. I mean, yes, you know, the first animation I was kind of introduced to was like the Clone Wars and stuff, but I feel like just progressively over time, it's gotten so good. And like people I feel like dog on it, they're like, oh, it's for kids. And I'm like, I don't like, I used to think that. And then I started watching it and I was like, there's such deeper meanings that you don't really understand if you're a kid. Like as an adult, kind of going back and watching some of this stuff, seeing Anakin, seeing Obi-Wan, seeing Ahsoka's character, and then getting to see them make their transition to live action. But I love the animated stuff. But the Tales was definitely very dark, a lot darker than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Especially Morgan's story was
Mm-hmm.
very, very dark.
But it was good too. Like
Yeah.
I love when Star Wars doesn't shy away from like really showing and like exploring like the terrible things, because it adds like so much more depth and it like raises the stakes. And it like, you know, even if the stakes are already high, like it kind of makes you realize, like fully realize like how high the stakes are, and how horrible the Empire is and how horrible this was. And even when it comes to like looking at the Jedi and the Jedi Order and like all these like nuanced conversations that we're having about the Jedi Order as an institution, and that at the end of the day, like Jedi are still like people. It doesn't matter if they're human or they're different species, like they're not perfect. They're not perfect beings, and they make mistakes, and they inevitably like make mistakes or make decisions based on, you know, these strong emotions, and kind of like where they went wrong along the way, that kind of, you know, that inevitably led to or helped lead to their downfall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Valid points across the board. Um, I've mentioned a few times I'm trying to get into reading and stuff, and maybe there's some other viewers out there that are also like, you know what, I should start reading some Star Wars books. Are there any kind of novice books that you would recommend for someone who's trying to kind of ease their way into reading and don't really know where to start?
I want to recommend the novelizations of the movies. I think those are really good. That's one of the ways I started reading Star Wars books, because I listened to the audiobooks of the novelizations, and I obviously I knew how it ended, so it was one of those things where like I could easily follow along and kind of get into like the like rhythm of a Star Wars book. Like, I mean, they are very, you know, Star Wars books are all different, but I had not really done any like novelizations. I hadn't really read in, you know, I was still new to Star Wars in general. So I'm like, okay, I know that I know what happens in the Phantom Menace, so I want to like read the book and I want to listen to it. And that was like what I listened to in the car on my commute when I like worked in an office, and or either on a walk or something like that. And that was really helpful. And then I, read Heir to the Empire, which was, the very first Star Wars kind of expanded universe book that we got in 1991. So that was my first read. Was a little difficult because it was really like you had to know a decent amount kind of going into it. It was definitely made for, or definitely written for the big fans of the original trilogy. Like you had to know like Luke's character, Leia, Han, and kind of the aftermath of that. Obviously, I've read it again, and I had a great time because I was like more entrenched in Star Wars book reading. A lot of people will recommend Heir to the Empire just because that was like their first Star Wars book, because it was like the first Star Wars book that really came out besides like those novelizations. And I would say too, if you are really into a certain era, like the prequels or the original trilogy, especially like a certain character, time period within that kind of era, go for those. So I love any and all of the prequel like adjacent books. So obviously I've like listened to the audiobooks of the novelizations, but I think most of my favorite Star Wars books occur, or at least partly, in the prequel era. There's, Brotherhood by Mike Chen, which is immediately after Attack of the Clones, and like easy to follow, fantastic story. You're getting Anakin and Obi-Wan perspectives. It's an adventure. It's, really beginning of the Clone Wars. It's fantastic. And if you're a fan of the original trilogy, and I would say the prequels too, like there's or if you're wanting to like read a book that doesn't necessarily involve the big characters that we always see, like the main characters, but you still want like a Star Wars story that like adds maybe a little fresh perspective, I highly recommend Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. It is a young adult novel, but it is so good. It covers like decades, I think, from like the end of the Clone Wars prequel era up until I actually think up until like Return of the Jedi. Like it goes through the original trilogy, but it's told through the perspectives of these two young children. They're like kind of childhood friends, and they grow up like kind of impoverished, and they both end up going into like the Imperial Academy. They want to be fighter pilots, and eventually at one point, one of them, the guy, he defects to the Rebel Alliance, but the girl stays behind. And it goes through like these kind of inner workings of like being a part of the Imperial machine, and like the creation of the Death Star, and like how like their friends like died on the Death Star, and how like she's really upset about that because she's like, your people killed our friends that were on the Death Star. And it's a lot of that, and it's so fascinating because it ends up being almost like an enemies to lovers type, there's a romance subplot, but it is like so much about like being a part of the Empire, and like what that looks like that perspective, and also being like a part of the Rebel Alliance, and what that looks like outside of being Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, things like that.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out because that does seem interesting. Because I know, like, you have the big characters and stuff, but there's so many other characters out there and other stories that you can kind of, venture into. So that'll be interesting. I'll have to go check those books out. Thank you for your
Yes,
recommendations.
of course.
But you also sent me a picture of your, like, would you call it a collection? Your book
Yeah.
collection? Okay,
Library.
your library.
You
You know,
obviously see it behind me, but
yes, but you did send me a picture of it, and I do have some questions.
hmm
How do you kind of organize your books, your library? Is it like chronological, kind of? How do like?
So, up top there is like I obviously have like Pop Funkos, and then there's like a collection of um, like special edition Star Wars books that I've gotten, and with the pretty sprayed edges.
Mhm.
A new, they're like you can't see it here, but like up top, they're actually in like almost like a rainbow color now because I have like one of every color. It looks so cool. Um, but I organize it. All of the canon books are organized chronologically. So obviously we have a growing shelf of High Republic books, starting with like phase two and then going on to phase three. And then it goes into the prequel era. And then after that, then kind of going down until you get to the Rise of Skywalker. The rest of the Star Wars books are organized kind of like by vibe that I that I was looking
Yeah.
at, like how they fit in there. The top two shelves, I have the Essential Legends like reprints, the paperbacks, and then next to that, I have an assortment of Legends books that I've collected, and I have some special edition Star Wars books from other countries. So, like when I went to France, I got a couple um, French editions of Star Wars books that just have like really pretty covers. I've gotten some like Japanese editions that have like beautiful artwork on them. And at the bottom, I have more like art books, reference books, comics, things like that. At this point, like I don't really have much more room, so I'm having to like reorganize and even more of my other shelves. You'll see that like not like both of these shelves are not all Star Wars books. Like I have like sci-fi and fantasy as well. So I'm
Mhm.
having to like constantly spend time rearranging to fit everything in there.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, you have a lot of books. How long did it take you to like kind of acquire all of these? Like just
I I feel like it's definitely ramped up over the last three, 4 years. Definitely the Star Wars books. I meant to like look back and try to find a picture of my bookshelf in like 2020 or early 2021, especially the Star Wars one. I recently like stumbled across a picture of my bookshelf like in our first apartment, and I had like it was half of a like shelf of Star Wars books. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, look at this." So I wanted to do like a comparison, like side
yeah.
by side of like how it started, how it's going. But I need to find like a good one to do that.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think about that all the time. Like some of my images, I'll like look at my little collection. I started with like two shelves and now it's all over the place. So it's crazy. But
Yes.
yeah, you have a lot of books and some really cool stuff. I'm sure the Japan ones are like insane because I love the Visions kind of comics and
hmm
stuff. And the artwork in those are amazing. So I could only imagine what the books are like.
Yeah, they're so pretty. I like every time they announce a new one because they've been doing like the High Republic ones, and they also came out with a Japanese edition of Ahsoka. There's this one
Oh,
publisher that's been doing it. I think it's called Gakken, um, and they split them into two volumes, the books, even
mhm.
though like they're not like super long, but they're like split into two volumes, and they um they have like an interesting like dust jacket style. Like it's more like paperback, but it's like thick paperback. And they come with like these little guides, like character guides, and they're all in Japanese. But it's really cool that they have this almost like exclusive art that's like only on these books that we don't see that type of art on any of the other High Republic books.
Gotcha. Okay. And I did see that you posted that you are writing a book, which congratulations, that is
Thanks.
super awesome. have you taken inspiration from any of the Star Wars novels and that's kind of going to translate over, or is it going to be a completely fresh new story?
Well, the book is nonfiction, so I can't
Okay.
take too much
Okay, cool.
inspiration from Star Wars. I wish I could. Um,
Oh,
but
yeah,
it
field guide.
is, but I mean, like I've always wanted to just write a book anyway. I've wanted to write some sort of story, like fictional story. And I in my notes app, I have like these like random ideas and I'm like, oh, this would be cool. But it is like hard to sit down and be like, okay, well, like, I want to write a story, but like I don't I have nothing going on. Like what do you mean? Like do you sit down and write a story? Um I would love to write, some sort of either Star Wars inspired or a, official Star Wars book someday. But I also love real space stuff.
Gotcha.
So
Yep.
I'm also like a space nerd. So I think, the two still go hand in hand. Star Wars is also in space, just not our space.
Yeah.
But I am really excited to do this book as well, just because like, seeing space history and researching it and going to these historic sites and talking to people and seeing rockets and things like that, like, brings me that like same amount of joy that I get from, reading and watching Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally missed that it said nonfiction field guide, but I was
Okay.
like, oh my god, she's writing a book. Like that's so like you are Space Wizards book club and you're writing a
Yeah.
book. Like that's so exciting. So I was very happy for you when I saw that. So I wanted to like bring it up,
Thanks.
but I was probably should have read the whole thing. So
It's okay. I'm like, oh my gosh, people are gonna think that like I'm like writing like a Star Wars book or something, just because that's like all I post about is like Star Wars stuff. And I'm like, okay, I need to make sure that like when I post this, I'm at like in front of a
yeah.
rocket, like I'm like being very clear that I'm like, hey guys, like this is nonfiction. Maybe in the future, cross your
Yeah.
fingers for me, that I will get to write some sort of, official Star Wars book. I feel like I've just been manifesting that. Like every way I can, I'm just making little comments. I'm like, I'm just going to manifest this.
Yeah. I mean, I would if you do end up, I would probably be one of the first ones to read it. I think you have a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of great ideas and, plot holes within the Star Wars universe that you could totally expand upon. And I'm sure you're a phenomenal writer. So
Thank
I'd be
you.
very interested to kind of read one of your books when that does happen. So
Thank you.
yeah, in the
Yeah.
future. But that was the picture you sent me. And usually my final wrap up question is since this is kind of like a collecting podcast, I know that you really it looks like the majority of your collection is books, but if you could give any piece of advice to another collector, what would it be?
Hmm. I well, I guess I will address it to people who want to collect books, read
Yeah.
books. Um, well, utilize your library for sure. I mean, that doesn't really help if you're wanting to collect things, but I would be remiss if I didn't say like utilize your local library to read Star Wars books. Use Libby, for audiobooks. I do that
Mhm.
all the time, even though I like have the physical book on my shelf. And to try to, if you want to collect books and you are not as much of a stickler for like the condition, and I mean like condition as in it's still readable, it's fine, it's not like it's dirty or anything like that. I have so many Star Wars books that are like ex library. I got them through thrift books, like because I wanted a specific like copy of them. Especially like there's a lot of Star Wars books that are no longer like in print and hardcover. And we're talking about like the expanded universe books, the legends books. Those books now, if you go to buy them, they're going to be either in the Essential Legends paperback or they're going to be in like the mass market paperback. Not a lot of people like the mass market paperback format. I'm not a big fan of it, even though I do have ones up there. But if you're wanting like to be a collector of like, okay, I want I want this series and I want it in this particular format, utilize places like thrift books and, you know, eBay kind of. I've had a lot of luck finding stuff on thrift books as well. And, you know, I think another piece of advice for people who want to collect is, I don't even know if it's like advice, but like read the books too. um,
Yeah.
and you know, I feel like there's this idea that like as readers and just beyond Star Wars books, like in general, is because of social media. You know, we have Book Talk and Bookstagram, is that you have to have like these elaborate shelves full of books, like overflowing. You have to have like all of these, you know, special editions and things like that. And like, if you want to do that, that's fine. But I think it really helps if you're a little more selective and you're like, okay, I want to read this book, but I also really want like to collect it. Like I want a you know, series, certain format, you know, pace yourself. And just because you don't have, you know, even like my shelves, I've seen other people's shelves, they have even more Star Wars books than I do, and they're like beautifully organized and everything. That doesn't mean that you're less of a fan or that you're less of a reader. If you just, you know, get Star Wars books from your library on audio or like your Kindle, like maybe you could not own one Star Wars book at all or one book of any series, and you could still be a fan, still be a reader. So you don't have to like collect everything. This is just my, you know, my passion, my hobby. So
Yeah. It's your niche, so
yes.
but it is cool because you do collect. I'm used to people. I bring people on that collect like statues and Funkos and stuff. And I know you're a big Star Wars reader, and I was like, you know what? It'd be really cool to have someone on that has a different perspective and collects
Mhm.
something different than, you know, a lot of the other people that I bring on, because you have such a different perspective. You clearly have a very vast knowledge of the expansive universe. So it was really cool kind of getting to talk to you a little bit more, because I've been following your channel for a while and I've always like I'm looking, I'm like, wow, she posts like such great stuff. She writes such
Thank
phenomenal
you.
stuff. So I was like, let me reach out to her, see if she's interested, because it'd be really cool to kind of get a different perspective. And it was a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. This, I mean, this is really a hobby turned passion project turned something that I actually kind of get paid for, which is like wild to me.
Yeah.
You know, like having the knowledge and like the writing skills, I write for Star Wars Insider as well, and like that's still so surreal to me.
Mhm.
That like, you know, Lucasfilm reads my stuff to approve it. I'm like, what do you mean? That's interesting. Okay. Uh, but yeah, like it, I feel like I can't collect any more like Funkos or like figurines. I always pass by like the Black Series and they always look so cool.
Yep.
And I'm like, no, I don't need something else to collect. Like
Yep.
I do not need that. Uh though we have started playing and collecting Star Wars Unlimited cards. So like that's, but those
Okay.
don't take up that much room.
No, they
Not like these, not like figures. Though, you know, and Legos and things like that. I always love following and like, you know, keeping up with people who do collect figures or like the Star Wars Lego sets, because they always look so cool and I'm like, no, I do not have room for more things.
Yep. Yeah, no, but that's what I like about this podcast and getting to do this is you get to, again, you know, the love of Star Wars connects everybody, but we all love different aspects of it and we collect different aspects of it. So books is your niche and it's really cool. And other people collect Funkos and that's theirs. And it's interesting to kind of get to explore and learn more about, you know, why people collect what they do and why they love certain aspects of Star Wars. Because again, that's kind of the underlying thing that connects us all. So it was a pleasure having you on, but before we jump off, could you let people know one more time where they can find you if you have anything that's coming up that you want people to be on the lookout for?
Yes, you can find me on Substack at the Space Wizards Book Club. I'm also Space Wizards Book Club on Instagram. I'm on TikTok if you search Chelsea Reads. And if you want to check out Star Wars bookmarks and stickers, I have the Space Wizards Book Club Etsy shop. So
Yeah, and I'm going to leave all your descriptions down in the link below, or link all your description. No, put all of your links down in the description below so people can find you easy. And I will see everybody next Thursday.